The spreadsheet was open on every screen in the Ministry of Economy. December 30th, 2024. 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, Argentina would close its fiscal year, and for the first time since 2010, the numbers at the bottom would be black, not red. Luis Caputo, the economy minister, stared at the final figure. 0.4% surplus. 0.4%. In any other country, this would be a rounding error. In Argentina, it was a miracle. But the real story isn't about the numbers. It's about what Javier Milei destroyed to create them. This is the tale of how one man took a chainsaw to 70 years of economic policy, and why half the country celebrated while the other half watched their world disappear. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you need to understand Argentina's relationship with fiscal responsibility. It's like a chronic gambler's relationship with sobriety. Everyone agrees it's necessary, but nobody actually expects it to happen. For 14 years, every Argentine president had promised to balance the budget. Cristina Kirchner promised it while printing money to fund soccer stadiums. Mauricio Macri promised it while borrowing billions from the IMF. Alberto Fernandez promised it while inflation reached triple digits. They all failed, or rather, they never really tried. Enter Javier Milei, the economist who kept a chainsaw on his desk during his campaign, who promised not to manage the state but to destroy it, who said the only good government spending was zero government spending. The state is a criminal organization, he declared on his first day in office, and I'm here to shut it down. Nobody believed he would actually do it. Argentine politics doesn't work that way. You promise radical change, then you negotiate, compromise, moderate. You keep enough people happy to stay in power. That's how the game is played. Milei didn't just refuse to play the game, he set the board on fire. January 2024, his first full month in office. Milei assembled his cabinet and gave them a simple instruction. Cut everything by half. If someone complains it's impossible, cut it by 70%. The Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity eliminated entirely. The Ministry of Transportation merged out of existence. The Ministry of Public Works gone. 15,000 government employees received termination letters in a single week. The unions called it a massacre. Milei called it a good start. But eliminating ministries was the easy part. The real challenge was the subsidies, the vast network of government support that kept electricity affordable, buses running, food on tables. For millions of Argentinians, these subsidies were the difference between poverty and destitution. Milei's approach was simple: eliminate them all. Why should a worker in Córdoba subsidize the electricity of someone in Buenos Aires? He asked at a press conference. Why should a farmer in the Pampas pay for someone else's bus ticket? This isn't solidarity. It's theft. The protests began immediately. Massive marches down Avenida de Mayo, pot-banging concerts that lasted all night, burning tires blocking highways. The imagery was powerful. Elderly pensioners crying about electricity bills, students unable to afford bus fare, families choosing between food and heating. International media portrayed Milei as heartless, a libertarian ideologue sacrificing real people for abstract principles. CNN ran a segment titled Argentina's Austerity Nightmare. The Guardian called him the chainsaw killer of the welfare state. But here's what they missed. For every person protesting in the streets, there was another watching silently from their window, thinking, finally. These were the middle-class Argentinians who had watched their savings evaporate in countless economic crises, who paid taxes that disappeared into corruption scandals, who worked 2 jobs while their neighbors collected multiple welfare payments. They didn't march. They didn't protest. But when Poles asked about Milei's cuts, they quietly answered, "Continue." March 2024. The first quarter numbers came in. Government spending had dropped by 35%. The deficit, which had run at 5% of GDP for years, was down to 1%. International markets took notice. Argentine bonds, which had been trading like toxic waste, suddenly became interesting. But Milei wasn't satisfied. "We're still stealing from people," he said in a cabinet meeting that was secretly recorded and leaked. "Every peso we spend is a peso we took from someone who earned it. I want that number at 0. His sister Karina, perhaps the only person who could challenge him, warned about the political costs. "Javier, people are suffering. Real suffering." His response, according to the recording, "They've been suffering for 70 years. At least now their suffering has a purpose." The cuts intensified. Scientific research budgets slashed by 70%. Cultural programs eliminated. Environmental protections defunded. Infrastructure projects canceled. The government stopped buying paper. Bureaucrats were told to bring their own pens. The international community was horrified. The UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty warned of a humanitarian crisis. The Pope, and Argentine himself, called for compassion in governance. The Biden administration expressed concern about human rights. Milei's response to each criticism was the same. "We're not asking for your money, so we don't need your opinion." But as government spending plummeted, something unexpected happened. Inflation, which had been running at over 200% annually, began to slow. The peso, which had been in free fall, stabilized. International reserves, depleted for decades, started growing. June 2024, second quarter results. The deficit had turned into a tiny surplus, 0.1%. The first quarterly surplus in over a decade. Milei celebrated by posting a video of himself doing a little dance in his office set to heavy metal music. It went viral. His supporters loved it. His opponents called it grotesque. "Dance while Rome burns," tweeted Christina Kirchner. "Rome isn't burning," Milei replied. "We're just turning off the lights in empty rooms." The economic orthodoxy couldn't explain what was happening. Traditional economics said such severe austerity should trigger a depression. Instead, certain sectors of the economy were growing. With government competition eliminated, private companies filled gaps. With regulations slashed, new businesses opened. With inflation expectations dropping, people began investing again. But the human cost was undeniable. Soup kitchens reported record demand. Public hospitals, their budgets gutted, began turning away non-emergency cases. Universities canceled classes because they couldn't afford electricity. The poverty rate, by some measures, reached 50%. Milei addressed this directly in a television interview. "Yes, people are poor. They've been poor for decades. The difference is now, they're poor with stable money instead of poor with worthless paper." The interviewer pressed, "But children are going hungry." Milei's response shocked even his supporters. "Children have been going hungry in Argentina my entire life. At least now, they won't go hungry forever." September 2024. Third quarter. The surplus grew to 0.3%. International investors who had written off Argentina as uninvestable began returning. The Country Risk Index, which measures the premium Argentina must pay to borrow, fell to its lowest level in years. The IMF, which had been skeptical of Milei's shock therapy, suddenly became supportive. Argentina is showing unprecedented fiscal discipline, the IMF director stated. Behind closed doors, IMF officials were amazed. They had recommended gradual reforms. Milei had done in months what they thought would take years, but the social fabric was tearing. Families divided between those who had government jobs, now gone, and those who had private sector work, now growing. Provinces that depended on federal transfers faced bankruptcy. Several governors threatened to declare independence from the federal system. Milei seemed to relish the chaos. At a rally in Mendoza, he declared, "Let them threaten, let them cry, let them rage. Mathematics doesn't care about your feelings. The budget will balance, even if the country doesn't." November 2024. As the year-end approached, it became clear that Milei would achieve the impossible, a fiscal surplus. But the opposition made one last attempt to stop him. They passed spending bills in Congress, using their majority to override his vetoes. Milei's response was unprecedented. He simply refused to spend the money. "Congress can pass whatever it wants," he said, "but I control the executive, and the executive won't execute illegal spending." Constitutional scholars debated whether this was legal. While they debated, Milei continued not spending. The Supreme Court, packed with his appointees after controversial midnight confirmations, sided with him. December 30th, 2024, the final day of the fiscal year. As midnight approached, crowds gathered outside the Ministry of Economy. Milei supporters came to celebrate. Opponents came to mourn. Police formed a barrier between them. Inside, Luis Caputo watched the final transactions process. At 11:58 p.m., he called Milei. "We did it. 0.4% surplus." Milei's response, according to witnesses, "It should have been higher." At midnight, fireworks erupted from the government house. Milei appeared on the balcony, holding an actual chainsaw, which he revved for the crowd. The image, a president with a chainsaw celebrating the destruction of government spending, would define his presidency. The international reaction was swift and divided. The Wall Street Journal called it the Argentine miracle. The New York Times called it the Argentine tragedy. The Economist, typically measured, ran a cover with Milei's face and the headline, "Mad or Genius?" Today, Argentina's budget surplus is a reality, the first in 14 years, achieved through methods that violated every norm of democratic governance, that caused immense suffering, that may have permanently damaged the country's social contract. But it's real. The numbers don't lie, even if everything else might. When asked recently if the human cost was worth it, Milei gave an answer that encapsulates his entire philosophy. "You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether the cost was worth it. The question is whether continuing to lie would have been worse. I chose truth over comfort. Argentina chose reality over illusion. And reality, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie." The surplus stands at 0.4%, a rounding error in most countries, a revolution in Argentina. Whether this revolution will save or destroy the country remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the age of fiscal fiction in Argentina is over. Javier Milei made sure of that. With a chainsaw,